first people I'd really like to thank are the folks at Central Connecticut State. This conference, more than any other, we kind of put it together a little last minute. And this is spring break. A lot of the students, they had to pull in to help with the tech and over at Welty and with the food and everything. And, you know, they're tremendous, and I just want to thank them for that. And for having the opportunity to have this place as a platform to be able to do this year in, year out. I think we have to be thankful of that, too. So I just want to thank Central, our host site, for this. I also want to thank the folks that work for us in the RMRP, our team. Everybody was all hands on deck. We even brought back Hannah, who's working in a tremendous new field, doing a lot of sustainability stuff with aquaculture and the like, and aquaponics in New Haven and New Britain. Talk to her. She wants to network with roundtables and the like to see how we can make this connection into that field. And everyone, you know, Mary Janicki, Ashley Preventure, Ken Barone, Amjad Khan, Aileen Keys, Brittany Kane. We have some Alex Sarkov, of course, and then we have some interns. We have, it's awesome that we're getting interns from other universities as well. We have a couple of MSWs from the UConn School of Social Work. We know the great work that that school is doing over there on this issue. So we have Colin and Melissa from there, and they're getting their feet wet in this area as well. And Renee, I want to thank her for all the work she did, and Bill, of course. And I hope I'm not missing anyone. But I just want to, again, it takes a team of us to put this all together every year, and I just want to thank everybody that made sure this happened.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's really good to be back again after all these years. The passion and excitement in the room is palpable. I think the event today has been very successful, certainly from the beginning point of the number of attendees and the level of commitment that you've expressed in the workshops and whatnot for the work ahead. I want to talk a little bit about this report that we published, but not much because it's kind of a retrospective. The group here today seems to be much more interested in what happens next in this whole issue of accountability and oversight and coordination seems to have become a theme of the day. But a little bit of retrospective because you are in that rare company of several states in the country that have reduced your prison population by double digits. There are several that we didn't include in our report because they had received a good deal of attention in other publications, particularly California, New York, and a couple of others. But in this particular tome, we focused on states that didn't get much attention, including Michigan and Connecticut. What we found across the states that were able to not only reduce by double digits, but sustain those double-digit reductions for at least a few years so far, is that each of the states did a bunch of different things in order to chip away at that mountain of the size of that prison population. You know, our prison populations do not come from just one thing. They come certainly from the number of people who are sentenced to prison because they committed a crime. But for the general public, who's often surprised to hear this, the majority of people who are in prison are not there for the crime they committed. They're there for a violation of the conditions of their supervision, either a violation while on a probationary sentence, which then results in their remand into the prison system, or a result of a parole violation. Some states that I've worked with have upwards of 60 or 70% of everyone in prison is there for some level of non-compliance. And when you consider the science of imprisonment and crime reduction and the reduction of victimization, it's interesting that you don't see much correlation between the size of a prison population, the number of people in prison, and the crime rate. It's not surprising if you understand the way the so-called justice system works. And one of your audience members today said, you know, there really isn't a justice system. I think he's really right about that. There's a lot of small justice agencies that if they butt up against each other, they tend to work together and collaborate, but as an overall system, it's not really a system. There isn't anybody really in charge of it. There isn't a bunch of rules and regulations that regulate how they interact with each other. So it's no surprise from that vantage point when you realize that most of the people who commit crimes are not caught. Those who are caught, many are not convicted. Of those that are convicted, only a relatively small percentage of them receive prison time. So if you expect some type of statistical relevance between the few number of people at the end of the day who go to prison and that crime rate, it's not surprising you're not going to see much correlation. It's inarguable that the people who are locked up certainly are not committing crimes in the free world, but it's also true that they may be committing crimes behind the walls, or they may be, because they are involved with other persons that have criminogenic tendencies, and they may be lower risk because our sentencing policies really don't dictate that the riskiest people go to prison. It dictates that the people that we're maddest at, we send to prison. That's why it's full of people who are non-compliant, not because we're afraid of them, but because we're mad at them because they won't do what they are told. And so you don't see this correlation. And in order then to chip away at the prison population, you've got to take a look at a bunch of different things. That certainly was the case in Connecticut. Some of your trends that you've documented in this report, and I think you're pretty familiar with, you have had a 25% reduction in your prison population between a high in 2007 of a little over 19,000 to about 14,005 in 2016. Your crime rate has reduced 27% for both violent and property crime rates. That is a 50-year low. Arrests have gone down through 2016 by 32%. New prison commitments have gone down 27% through 2016. And for a variety of reasons, your return to prison recidivism rate has reduced by 55%. So as a point of reference, recidivism can be measured as a rearrest or a reconviction or a reincarceration. There's lots of ways to measure recidivism, but when you're looking at prisoner reentry, one of the keys is those people that are so seriously violate or commit another crime that they end up having their supervision revoked and they go back to prison. Or in this state, since so many people complete their sentence without any community supervision or max out of their prison sentence, they too should be counted in returns to prison. But for a variety of reasons, those percentages gone down, 55% of those returns to prison. You downsize, you had a closure of 3 correctional facilities, juvenile detention center, housing units, and 3 other facilities. And importantly, you saved $40 million. And one of the themes that you've heard throughout today, in fact, one of the themes that you see throughout the country in states that have done justice reinvestment is, so what happened to all that money? If we saved it, where did it go? Did they put it in a lockbox somewhere so that the people who are in the field that are doing the work that reduces that crime rate, reduces that victimization, reduces those returned to prison so they have access to those dollars? Do those dollars get reinvested into our parole system so the agents aren't covered up with so many cases they can barely breathe? Does some of it go into prison programs? No. What we see across the country is that that promise of reinvestment largely has not happened. In all of the states that have done justice reinvestment, only the most recent one, where I've been working for 4 years in Louisiana, made it part of the law that required that not only were those savings determined, but by law they were required to be put back into the system with grants and funding for the Department of Correction, which took about 25% off the top, for parole and for prison programs, and then 20% for juvenile programs and 35% for adult programs. So after 17, I think 18, maybe even 20 states went through the justice reinvestment strategy, it wasn't until only recently that the most recent state, Louisiana, made it a law that those savings had to be reinvested. And so y'all are in a conundrum. And what's interesting in the political framework here is that if you did not have the support of the grassroots communities, and the folks that understand this business like you do, who are talking to your legislators and promoting these changes, if you weren't involved, it's very likely that those new laws might not have been passed. And yet the reward for that is continued frustration to not have the resources that you need to do the work, or even worse, and this is certainly the case in Connecticut, that because of a downturn in revenues, you actually have less money now to do this work than you did before the promise of justice reinvestment. Department of Corrections programs have been cut in this state by tens of millions of dollars, effective, efficient programs, caseloads are sky high, et cetera. Nonprofit programs continue to have to fight for every dollar they have, and oftentimes they have to fight with each other. Faith community is the same. And often nonprofits are fighting with the faith community for those limited dollars. And if I'm running a nonprofit, I sure don't want to have to fight with somebody who's getting their messages from God himself. Very tough to overcome that. And so the work today that we've discussed in the big panels that we've had have been around this issue of not only how do we coordinate better, because this state, like every state, not only did you reduce your prison population by doing a bunch of things, your continued work in this arena is about doing a bunch of other things. And it's a long list of things, and they're good. They're powerful. And in and of themselves, each one of them has some degree of impact on the overall system, and over time you will generate some ideas as to what the total impact is as a result of these things. But as you all recognize, and as certainly the report that the collaborative put out recognizes, is they aren't coordinated, and there isn't an entity that is accountable to you to make certain that when savings are generated, those savings, at least some of them, are reinvested. Or accountable to make certain that if a program intends to reduce recidivism, return to prison recidivism, for example, in the reentry arena, that they have the tools and resources they need to properly target those people who are the most likely to recidivate and therefore have to receive the benefit of an inordinate amount of your funding. What we know from the work that we've done all over this country is that if programs rely on word of mouth or people coming to them for services and showing up at their door, and as good social work agencies, the programs are fulfilling their needs and addressing what they need as they should, it's very likely without some discipline and controls that those people that you're working with are not the people who are most likely to recidivate. The people who are most likely to recidivate are those that don't knock on your door, who don't show up, who are non-compliant, have bad attitudes, think like criminals, act like criminals, hang around with other criminals, and those are the ones that are so difficult to find if you wait until after they get out. So some of the evidence and research we've seen is the importance of identifying those people who are most likely to recidivate prior to release and making certain that those individuals are connected prior to release with those services that they need so they're ahead of the line in terms of getting those services. And that's a very difficult thing to achieve, and one of the reasons that each state needs to have some type of oversight and coordinating responsible agency that is going to help all of the programs across the state understand the science, learn the science, and implement these evidence-based practices, which are a whole lot easier to talk about than they are to implement. So the types of things that you did here that you're all aware of, that the report, Decarceration in 5 States, listed include focusing on reducing young people's contact with the criminal justice system. You, through policy, very smart policy work, you all decriminalized some of the youth and their behavior so that they were no longer going to be found delinquent. You raise the age of persons who would be dealt with in the adult system. And when you consider one of the reasons that your return to prison rate dropped, it's partly because you took a whole subpopulation out of the pipeline. And now they are in the juvenile justice system. That will have a positive impact on the number of people who go to prison and the number of people who return. You increase releases from prison. Your Department of Correction here is well known nationally for being innovative, creative, evidence-based, and you should be very thankful that this group of smart, dedicated people are doing the work that they're doing, but recognize that they've been cut and slashed, and they can't own reentry. That has to be owned by you. They are your citizens who are returning back to you. And many communities have defaulted to the idea that the prison system and the parole system owns reentry, and you're a secondary consideration, and that's flipped upside down. Reentry is owned by the people who are in prison, getting out of prison, returning to their communities and their family members. And that has been a theme that we've heard since the opening 5 minutes of this event today. We've heard it again and again. The people who are affected need to be engaged, not as secondary, but as primary. Who better knows the impact on a whole range of issues, from housing, employment, access to medical and mental health, than those people themselves who are engaged with it. And they're the most important voice. And yet they're often overlooked. And when you look at oversight and coordination agencies, when they are run by the government, they're run by the governor's office or they're run by the Department of Corrections, there's a natural propensity not to include people who are formerly incarcerated in those groups, although we've seen that change a bit over the past decade. One of the things that you did not do, you did not much reduce racial disparity in the system, and the fact that you did some of it was something that just sort of happened because you didn't go after that as an issue. There's no documentation that indicates that the Justice Reinvestment Act was intending to reduce racial disparity, but because the things you did had an impact on the people who regularly are arrested, convicted, and went to prison in return, they, of course, had a disproportionate impact, positive impact, on persons of color. But as you stand here today, the incarceration in the state for black residents remains 9 times higher, for Hispanics 4 times higher than for white residents in Connecticut. So, as also has been heard time and time again today, is there is much work left to be done. Not just because of this disparity issue, but I think very largely about this disparity issue. And it isn't just black people or brown people that are affected by this, of course. White people are affected as well. And if you've seen the documentary 13, how many folks have seen that documentary? How many folks have not? Those of you who have not, go see it. Google it. Netflix lets you look at it for nothing. It's an amazing story of how the justice system and the prison system was built in this country to replace slavery, and there's no doubt about it. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States disallowed slavery unless, of course, you're convicted of a felony. And then you can be a slave. That's why we pay people a penny a day in Louisiana for working on the cotton plantation. So you're not alone in having to deal with this idea that you've had some accomplishments and celebrate those accomplishments, but at the end of the day, you've got so much work left to do. And while the folks in the communities across the state and the activists and the advocates were largely responsible historically for promoting this work in the legislature through legislative leaders like Bill, who we heard from today, and others, they were compelled to do this work because of their understanding at the community, at the family level, of the impacts of incarceration. While you started that process, you were thrilled and happy, I'm certain, that Governor Malloy and other high elected officials took it on as their own legacy issue and then moved it further and faster ahead than otherwise might have been done. But then what happens is that they leave, and then there's a vacuum, and now we have a new governor that didn't run on this. Very few governors ran on crime and justice issues in the last gubernatorial election, and so you don't know exactly where the governor will start to implement some of the things that he mentioned in the work through the transition. Very important, very critical, as we heard today from Rob and others, that stuff was put in writing, at least as part of the plan. But now we have to wait and see. So now you become, once again, tumbleweeds who are kind to figuring out, well, where will the wind blow and what will happen next? And what I'm hearing loud and clear from everybody here today is that it's time for this group to own this. Y'all are the accountability group in some way or fashion. You are the oversight group in some way or fashion. Certainly, with your critical partners, if you don't have them at the table, you will not be effective. You have to have OPM as a partner. You have to have DOC as a partner. You need the funders as a partner. But it should be owned and driven by the people that owned and drive reentry. And it is, in fact, as you have heard repeatedly today, it is you, it is these people in the room. And this report, I think, is a good starting point, as you suggest it is. You're not alone in this idea that what happened to the reinvestments. I've worked in a bunch of states. In fact, I shouldn't complain about justice reinvestment because I built my consulting business around going into states that have passed the legislation and don't exactly know what to do with a 160-page omnibus bill that has 13 different parts and probably did not engage the implementers in its design, nor have a plan of action to follow it up. Legislation without a plan for implementation is not legislation, it's a hallucination. Because stuff just doesn't happen. People have to make it happen, and you have to have the resources to be able to get it done. And while there's been legislation here that indicated a role for OPM to continue to update the strategic plan, it's very clear, too, that they're not the oversight agency that's going to do this. In the Department of Correction, with a new corrections director from Utah and with a new governor, you're waiting, as you will probably have to wait for a couple months, to decide what priorities they want to pursue within the light of budget deficits that are alarming. And if you think that justice issues are going to be funded over economic issues or education or roads, then you too are suffering from some form of hallucination, because it just won't happen. You have a report here that provides strategic directions, but it is not a plan of action. It is suggestions, it is recommendations on what to pursue, and first and foremost, and I see this report as having 4 cornerstones, the primary first cornerstone is this issue of oversight and coordination. The second cornerstone is delivery and access to services and the detail around those services. And at the end of the day, that's mostly about money. You don't have enough housing. You don't have enough pre-employment and employment programs. You've got pockets of excellent production in these arenas. You've got funders. I attended one of the workshops, and the funders are there. They explain some great programs that they're funding. But at the end of the day, programs by themselves will not reduce the statewide recidivism rate. Programs won't do it. You have to have policies, you have to have protocols, and you have to have local comprehensive approaches that tie those programs together through a series of written agreements or local policies that dictate how the system is supposed to work and how, with all those programs run by different agencies, you're going to manage the teaching, the training, and the accountability to make certain that the people that are getting the services are those who are most likely to recidivate. And these are the people who we don't much want to work with compared to those that are more compliant and more motivated. Therefore, in a good reentry performance-based system, you're going to work with your partner in the Department of Correction who will identify those people who are moderate to high risk of recidivating and put them on a track into your communities so you've got access to them before they're released, so that when they're released, they don't stand in line for 6 weeks waiting to get into a program when they've been sitting in the joint for 6 years, and you know very well what the requirements are to get them enrolled or pre-enrolled in programs, and yet they stand in line like everybody else. And yet they stand in line to get an ID. How in heaven's name can a state government that runs the ID system not make certain that people who get out of prison have a bona fide state ID? How long have you been fighting this in this state? 15 years? 23 years. There's a man who's at least got 25 years in the system. These things will not happen unless the bureaucracies are compelled to do them through the legislature by the people who are the most effective lobbyists in the legislature, and that is you, because you are the constituents of the people who run those committees. And if you become effective in your ability to prove the worth of these programs, because you are in fact addressing those people who are moderate to high risk and you're showing positive impact, those results can help propel those legislators who work for you to make certain that you are not last in line when it comes to the appropriations, particularly in tough budget streams. There was a report published, a national report several years ago, called Ending Mass Incarceration, Charting a New Justice Reinvestment, that took a very critical view of the justice reinvestment approach, written by some very stellar academics and practitioners across the country. It's worth looking at. And it indicates that the results of justice reinvestment are actually mixed, because in many states, and Connecticut is one that is pointed to in this report, you are already heading toward reduced prison population. You are already heading toward improved reductions in admissions and releases before justice reinvestment came in, and yet the report that Justice Reinvestment published didn't say much about that. It also states unequivocally that the promise of reinvestments has almost unanimously been unmet in all of the states. And here's the problem that we have with some of the numbers that these reports generate, because they fail to make the distinction between money that is cost avoided, it's not going to be spent, and cost savings. You can look at straight line projections in a state that will tell you that if things keep going the way that they're going, you're going to have to build 20 more prisons or 50 more prisons, 200 million, 300 million, $1 billion worth of more prisons, and that generates all sorts of fear and loathing. Oh God, we can't spend the money on that. But let's make no mistake about it, that money's not committed. There is no revenue to do that. So when you pass laws that reduce that straight line projection, and instead not that many people are admitted to prison, the length of stay in prison is not lengthened, but it's reduced. The number of people get out of prison is not decreased, it's increased, and their success in the community goes up. When you do those things by legislation or through policy and practice, and you avoid that $200 million, $300 million, $1 billion cost, do you know how much money you have in your hand? Nothing, because you never had that money committed in anybody's budget. You were avoiding those costs. How much money did you actually save? 10 million, 20 million, 30 million. How confusing is it in a state where they have a report that says we're going to save the taxpayers of North Carolina $420 million, and the nonprofit service providers and the advocate and the activists in the communities are just so thrilled to see that big number. And then the reinvestment comes forth, and it's about $6 million, and they don't get much of any of it. What happened to the money? It was avoided. It wasn't savings, And that use of those terms is a thing to be critical of this work. The fact is that engagement with communities is a proven, evidence-based practice, not only from a client-specific perspective that you want to deliver services in the communities where the prisoners, formerly incarcerated persons reside. The principles of effective intervention include providing services in natural communities. But this has to be taken a step further when you're considering issues of coordination and accountability. The roundtables that are here have been functioning for many years, trying to put it together locally to make certain, starting with those people that max out of prison who don't have the benefit of community supervision, have got some access to services, and slowly but surely have been working with more and more people with not a whole lot more money. And they represent then, in the natural community where these people are returning, a body of increasingly expert subject matter folks who are learning how to make certain that the assets they have are identified, how to recognize what the barriers are to getting those assets matched up with the people who are riskiest and neediest, so that you do in fact reduce the recidivism rate. You do in fact reduce victimization, because there is a matching between those limited resources and the people who are most likely to recidivate. If you don't do that, you will never, ever change the trajectory. And I'm not suggesting that you don't work with low-risk people. Some of the low-risk people who have very little likelihood of returning back to prison because they're older and more compliant and they're not completely criminal thinking, they oftentimes have the highest need. And if you burn up all your resources on the low risk with the highest need, you won't have anything left. Certainly not enough left to be able to deal with the people that are tougher to deal with, who are non-compliant, got bad attitudes, antisocial behaviors, antisocial thinking. Those are the criminogenic characteristics of the people that we have to work with. So this notion of having engagement that's locally controlled is critical. The report recognizes that, and it is excellent when it comes to what it says about these things right in the summary that you have. It says the process is larger than state criminal justice system. Its success in achieving the stated goals is dependent on a multi-pronged approach, including collaboration between state and municipal governments, communities, and justice-involved people. And it says that these are the three entities that need to work together. The state system, providing information and resources, and a positive environment for these changes to take place, communities and municipalities, and justice-involved people. And this report said that, and now you as a group have been saying that all day long. I suggest to you that that organization that holds this work accountable and has as their primary responsibility coordination and a movement toward greater resources so that the work can continue and expand should be comprised of those three groups: state agencies, communities, municipalities, and justice-involved people. Reentry, it says, is a community-centric approach. Who owns prisoner reentry? Is it the prisons? Is it parole? Or is it the communities? I offer it's the communities because those communities include those people who've been justice-involved and been in prison and their family members. And you have the long-term view. This is not a 3-year project, a 5-year project. This is not something that can get done over the span of one governor's 4 years or a governor's 2 terms. This is the only state in the union I've ever been in that allows governors to have term after term after term. It's like the FDR state. And yet, for reasons I think we can all appreciate, governors don't usually run after their second term. It's a tough job. But the communities are here to stay. You're here to stay. The organizations and associations that you have, your churches, your temples, your synagogues, your nonprofit boards and your agencies, your United Ways, they will be here long past the political cycles. And so it's a very critical moment for you to decide who is going to do what when. This report talks very clearly about the money and the absence of the money, and it's stark to understand very clearly as you do that you save $40 million and now you don't have a penny in the bank. There was no lockbox created where the money would go and you would have access to it later, and yet the idea of a lockbox is one that spans generations, and we just don't do it. There was no push in the Justice Reinvestment Act to require the reinvestment. And as a result of there not being a requirement, it simply hasn't happened. In fact, as I mentioned, and I've learned as I've been here the past couple of days, the amount of funding that's going to programs, certainly in the Department of Correction, has been decimated. You don't want that to happen. Again, you know what Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing the same way over and over again and thinking it's going to change. This is the other thing he said. And it has to do with what we're talking about here, because this isn't simple stuff. This is complicated. The idea of targeting people who are otherwise likely to recidivate, trying to gear your caseloads to those people, finding them, making certain that the nonprofits and the state agencies have got staff that are educated on a career path to understand how these evidence-based practices and principles have to be employed in day-to-day caseload management. Not just talk about it, but actually do it. It costs money. Your 4 cornerstones that I would suggest you see from this report are this idea of oversight and coordination. Secondly, as I mentioned, access to services and specifics around those services. And the other, which I think is the glue that holds it all together, is a prisoner case management development process that begins in prison with those people that are moderate to high risk and then continues post-release. That's the most important thing. If you do better case management and you differentiate cases between the higher risk and the lower risk, and you do some things with the lower risk, but you spend most of your resources on the moderate to high, if you do that in a way that's efficient, you will reduce the overall state recidivism rate because you're reducing it one person at a time. And you're doing that because you're doing effective targeting. And that effective targeting is leading to better reentry case planning and the proper match of those people and their needs and their risk levels to the programs that are built to be able to respond to that level of risk and need. That's not easy. That's hard. And it takes a long time. Certainly longer than 1 term. Longer than 2 terms. We're digging in. How many folks have been involved in this work for 20 years or more? God bless you. How many of those with your hands up think you'll be here 20 years or more? Uh-oh, not me. I ain't going to do the work when I'm 85. How many people are under the age of 40? All right, raise your hand high because you got a good 20 years, because that's what it's going to take. Here's the other thing that Einstein said. Keep things as simple as possible, but no simpler. No simpler. That means for the work that you're doing here, you've got to become very proficient and clear about the challenges that lay ahead, and you've got to make sure that you've got an organization that takes advantage of what we know from people who have been involved in the system and their families, takes advantage of those state agencies that are doing so much of the positive work that takes place in the state, and the communities that are going to suffer the worst, particularly those urban centers where the reentry roundtables sit, that they're engaged in a process and they're the ones that are providing that oversight. And then the 4th cornerstone is to continue to support and expand and celebrate the work that's being done by your parole system in the state, who have some of the toughest jobs in the world toughest jobs in the world. We all know that when we're working with people who are motivated, and we know when we're being realistic about the people who are committing crimes, that there is a group of people that we really do need to lock up. Some of us may be true abolitionists, and others may believe that there's certain career criminals, sociopaths, and psychopaths that they've got to be separated from society. These people, too, are supervised by parole agents, and their life is in danger. And they want effective outcomes. They join these agencies so they can get better performance from the system and for individuals. And even though we always don't agree with their policies and their procedures and how they do the work, and some are better than others, God knows. I ran the parole system in Michigan for years. We really need to understand that they're one of the primary four cornerstones of the work ahead. So how do we move ahead? So let's think about what Einstein said, and let's come up with a little formula. So I've got this little formula here, W3H2O. Who does what when, and how to organize. Who does what when, and how to organize. So that's W3H2O. That's what you have to decide. You have to decide it as a group, and this group, like any group, you might say you're a bunch of cool cats. And I only say that so I can say you're like herding cats. Everybody's got their own agenda. Everybody's got the things that they want to have done. You come here together, and you are collaborating together. You are applauding each other's statements all day long, and there's a good degree of agreement. I want this group to do two things, and this is how we'll facilitate this very quickly. At your table, some of you have got an assigned facilitator, and some of you don't. If you're one of the tables that don't, you'll know who the facilitator is, because when I'm done talking, they're going to slap their hands down on the table and they say, okay, let's get started. That's who's in charge. And I want your table to answer this question, and I want your table to give us a number of 1 to 5. How important is this issue of accountability and coordination in light of everything else that we know that's important, in light of everything that's in this report and what you already know about access to services and the importance of housing and employment and mental health and substance abuse, et cetera, and the need for good case management and the need for a strong parole agency. In light of all of that, this one thing, how important is it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not particularly important at all, and 5 being very important? Each table needs to come up with a number, and if we have time, which I think we will, we're going to ask for some of you to give me your number that you agree to at your table. You don't have a lot of time to reach agreement. Don't come up with 2 numbers. Don't give us a range. It's just 5 numbers. You can do this. The tables that have only 3 or 4 people will find this easier than people that have 10 or 12. But come up with a number. That's part 1. That should be quick. That should take 3 or 4 minutes. The second thing to consider is this. And this is a list. A quick brainstorm list. What are the barriers that this state faces in your community, particularly since you're organized around regions? What are the barriers you face to achieve better accountability and coordination? What are the barriers? Your facilitator, whoever that person is, will facilitate that discussion. And also you need somebody to write that stuff down. You'll know who your recorder is, because when you start your work, that person will have a pad in front of them and a pen. That's your recorder. And right now, I just saw 5 people drop their pens and move their pad. We already know who you are. Well, we're not going to have time to report out that list of barriers, but we're going to collect that. We're going to collect that. And then before I close, I'm going to have one more thing I want the group to do, but I don't want to steal my own thunder for that. It's 3:30. We're only going to take about 10 minutes to do this, or less, so that we've got time for a little bit of report out. We still close to 4 o'clock, or you all will get up and leave at 4 o'clock, so if I'm still talking at that time, that's kind of up to me, I guess. But does this make sense? You know what you have to do? What 2 things you got to do? Who knows? Number 1? Oh, excellent. Very good. Number 2? Number 2? See, I can't hear a word you're saying, but I know that you're on track. I'm just sure of it. Okay, get to work. I'll be back in touch.
But it just kills my heels.
Okay. So, how many tables found it pretty easy to understand who their facilitator was? Okay? Anybody have any trouble with that? Everybody have a recorder? Anybody have any trouble with that? Okay, we're going to ask you to put that number on a piece of paper and just put it on one of these tables up here before you leave. But let's get some reports from some of the regions. So let's start over here with Hartford. What was your number of the importance of coordination? It was 5. Why was it a 5? Do we have a mic? Can you give them a mic? Why was it a 5, Hartford? Very good. It was very, very important.
So also was a 5 because it's important that the partners communicate amongst each other. That coordination, if you're not communicating, there's a lack of understanding what's happening.
So it's important because they have a role of communication and coordination, and without that, we're kind of stuck. Okay, another group?
And accountability, I hear.
Okay, Bridgeford? Or Bridgeport? I don't have my glasses, I can't see. Bridgeport, what number did you come up with?
5.
Why was it a 5?
We've been meeting for 12 years. and a lot of the things that we wanted to do and talked about doing haven't quite gotten done just yet. You know, there was the ban the box issue that we come and gone, and that really didn't do too much. That was more, I don't know, it was like a pan a pig, I guess.
Flash in the pan. No, so you're looking for continuity, dedication over time, long term.
Yeah, if we could make sure that things like a clean slate legislation goes through
Yep.
because of the work that we do and other legislation going forward can happen, then we're doing something.
Okay, another community? Got a hand up back there? Vanna White, the new,
Southeast.
So we said at our table unanimously it was a 5, but we also went one step further and said that we're pretty sure that everybody in this room thinks it's a 5.
Oh, yeah.
That's not the issue. The issue is, do the politicians, the legislators, and our neighbors that aren't here also think it's a 5? Because If we all think it's a 5, but they don't, and it's not on their radar screen,
Right.
there will be no accountability.
Right. And that is one of the fundamental aspects of a good accountability coordinated system, is that the partners who are responsible for the system have to be part of that process. Directly involved, not just indirectly. And that, you are an orthopedic surgeon, I believe, and what you said earlier was we need to build the ecosystem that transcends the political cycle by using the people in this room. Yes, we can do it. Was it you who said that? No? Okay, well, the guy who looked like you. Okay, next table, next region. Yes?
So this is from so barriers we discussed would be financial.
Nope. We need a number, 1 to 5.
5.
Why was it a 5?
Does everybody agree that it was 5?
For the same reasons everybody else said. Nothing new to that. I want to make sure we hear from everybody on this before we get into the list of barriers. That's something we'll look at later. Other group over here. Vanna, you're going to have to move a little faster.
We were sort of in the same boat as 2 tables ago. If we look at ourselves internally,
Right into the mic.
we're sort of in the same boat as the gentleman from 2 tables ago, the southeast. Southeast, okay. I mean, internally, we all agree importance, it's a 5, but if we look at the community as a whole, how it's perceived
Right.
in the community, how
Good.
the level of coordination, then we're down to a 3.
Ah, okay, good. That's good to know. Other tables, other groups? Raise your hand, back here, right behind you.
We were a 5 as well. I don't know that any group said anything that we didn't say.
Okay.
So we'll just piggyback on that. Did you want to know our barriers now as well?
Nope.
All right then.
Okay, thank you very much. Were there other groups that had this discussion? Over here? I'm going to call on this table over here too. You guys. Go ahead.
So we're representing Hartford. Ours was a 4.25. It was 4 2/8, so it's 4.25.
Okay. All right, good. So other tables have this discussion. You folks over here, you work with parole, DOC? These folks over here? Yes? This table with these 5 guys sitting there, yes? Did you have this discussion? And what did you come up with? A 5. Isn't that great? Give these guys a round of applause. This is your parole agency saying we have to have a good deal of accountability and coordination. Why is it a 5? You have a spokesperson who can talk about it. Why is it a 5? We'll turn the tape recorder off. Go ahead, speak freely.
We just think it's really important for the success of our clients to have everything set in place when we release it.
Good. Can you do it all?
No,
What do you have to have in the community to get it done?
a lot of helping hands.
A lot of help. You know what the research says is that about out of 100% of a particular type of milieu or treatment or therapy or service orientation, about 30% of it should be done inside, 70% should be done outside, and you'll see those numbers reversed virtually in every state in the country. Well, listen, we're coming into the close of it. These lists that you recorded for barriers, we've got to make sure that they're turned in. And what I'd like you to do, is there still a table set up outside? What should we do with these papers?
Yeah, Amjad, maybe you can, if the table is out there in the back, you can hand them to Amjad.
Put in the table in the back. I want to do one more thing, and this is a shout out. You don't need a mic. I want as many of you as possible in the next several minutes to give me one word that describes what you're feeling or thinking about this event today, and somebody has got to record these single words. I don't know if you want to ask somebody to do it, but I want single words from people that describe it, because I want to do a word cloud as to what you walk away with today. So one word that describes how you're feeling or how you're thinking as you walk out the door and you go home. One word, sir. Everybody, every single person. Well, that means you're first.
Great.
Great? Good. Another word. Yes. Helpful. Another word. Just shout it out. Well, one at a time, though. Let's start over. Raise your hand. You're an unruly crowd. Yes, ma'am. Doable. Very good. Optimistic. Very good.
Energized.
Energized. Very good. Empowered. Very good. Committed. Beginning. Informed. Yes. A start. That's 2 words. Yes. What? Inspired. Good. Others, sir. Connected. Good. Others. You don't leave until everybody gives me a word, so we have a long time. Go ahead. Committed. Hopeful. Disturbed?
Determined.
What?
Determined.
Determined. Thank you. I'm old and can't hear. Yeah. Dedicated. Good. Others. Hallucination. That would be hallucinatory. Does that describe you or the people at your table? Mostly the people at your table. What's that? Revolutionary. Very good. Challenging. Yes. Other words. Yes. Disciplinary. Interdisciplinary. Very good. Other words.
Fired up.
Fired up. That's 2 words. Put a hyphen in there. 1 word. All right. Now listen. I'm going to give you permission to be negative here, okay? Because nobody has said anything that's negative, and the reason you don't is because people don't want to do that. You got another positive word? Discovered?
Discoveries.
Good. How about some negative words here? Some people gotta have, you can have...
Discouraged.
Apprehensive. Good. Frustrated. Hesitant. Stigma. Yes, in the back.
Tired.
Tired. All right. Who's going to say hungry? Raise your hand. All right. Thank you very much. It's been a great day.